How the Ethiopian Bible explains the balance of good and evil. For centuries, the Ethiopian Bible has existed in a paradox at once visible and invisible. To scholars, it is the oldest complete Christian Bible on earth, a priceless witness to the earliest centuries of faith. Yet to much of the world, it remains hidden, almost mythical, resting not in the vaulted cathedrals of Rome or the prestigious libraries of Oxford, but in the ancient stone-hewn churches of the Ethiopian highlands. There, beneath the scent of frankincense and the dim glow of oil lamps, priests have guarded its pages for nearly 2 millennia. Within its weathered parchment are not only the familiar Gospels and Psalms, but also voices silenced elsewhere, books once cherished by the first Christians, yet later cast aside, tales of angels who watch and fall, visions of cosmic justice, and an account of human destiny that feels at once alien and hauntingly intimate. What makes the Ethiopian Bible so provocative is not merely its age, nor its preservation of lost scriptures. It is that, hidden in its text, lies a radically different lens through which to see one of humanity's oldest and deepest obsessions: the struggle between good and evil. Western theology, forged in the fires of philosophical debate and doctrinal decree, has long cast these forces as absolute opposites, locked in a war that can end only with one's total destruction of the other. But in the Ethiopian tradition, the script changes. Good and evil are indeed in conflict, yet they are also mysteriously bound together, woven into the very fabric of creation. One cannot be fully understood without the other. And in the quiet of an Ethiopian monastery, the idea stirs like a whisper carried on the mountain wind. The balance of good and evil is not an accident, it is part of the plan. If this vision challenges what you've always believed, stay with us. We're only at the threshold of a story that will turn your ideas of heaven and hell inside out. Subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments, and let's wrestle with these truths together, because the real conversation starts here. When good and evil aren't at opposites, the shocking unity hidden in ancient pages. In the Western imagination, morality is often reduced to a rigid battlefield, an eternal clash between two irreconcilable forces. We picture it like a grand cosmic chessboard, white pieces and black pieces, the armies of heaven advancing against the legions of hell, every move a calculated strike intended to obliterate the other. This is the dualism that has shaped sermons, novels, and Sunday school stories for centuries: a clean division, a war with only one acceptable end: the total annihilation of darkness. And yet, the Ethiopian Bible dares to disrupt this comfortable script. It presents a subtler, more haunting vision, one that does not dilute the reality of evil but reframes it entirely. Here, good and evil are not simply locked in a death match, they are interdependent forces in the grand drama of creation, bound together not by friendship, but by the mystery of divine purpose. This is not moral relativism. It is not a soft compromise between light and dark. It is an acknowledgement, perhaps the most unsettling acknowledgement, that the story of the universe is more complex than we have been told. The Book of Enoch, preserved in Ethiopia long after it was erased from the European canon, reveals a cosmic tapestry where even rebellion has its appointed place. In its pages, the fall of angels is not merely a cautionary tale of pride and punishment. It is a calculated moment in the unfolding story of justice and mercy. The Watcher's angels, once entrusted with guiding humanity, fall to temptation, descending to earth and corrupting it with forbidden knowledge. Their failure is catastrophic, yet through it, divine justice is displayed, and the resilience of the righteous is forged in a crucible far hotter than safety could ever provide. The unity this vision suggests is not the sentimental harmony of a greeting card, where all differences dissolve into a bland peace. It is a unity of purpose, one that is not always visible to human eyes. Just as the shadow cannot exist without the light, evil becomes the stark backdrop against which goodness burns brightest. A candle's flame is unnoticed at noon, but in the dead of night, it becomes a beacon. In this worldview, moral purity is never born in sterile isolation. It emerges from the furnace of temptation, where the soul must confront its own capacity for betrayal and choose deliberately to turn toward the light. And here lies the danger for modern ears. This idea dares to say that evil, though never condoned, is not entirely without purpose in the divine scheme. It is the adversary that makes the choice for goodness meaningful. Without the possibility of cruelty, compassion loses its moral weight. Without the reality of betrayal, loyalty is untested and shallow. The Ethiopian Bible's vision asks us to imagine a creator who does not simply allow danger but builds it into the story, because the value of love is revealed most fully when it is chosen over its opposite. Philosophers have brushed against this idea in the doctrine of the felix culpa, the happy fault, the belief that humanity's fall, though tragic, opened the way for an even greater redemption. But what Ethiopia has preserved is older, rawer, and less domesticated by centuries of theological debate. This vision does not come to us polished in the language of seminaries. It comes to us like a voice carried on desert wind, whispering truths that both comfort and terrify. It tells us that creation was never meant to be a padded nursery free of sharp edges. It was meant to be a proving ground where virtue would wrestle its opposite, where courage would be born only in the presence of fear, and where victory would never be handed to us. It would have to be seized, at cost, through the perilous freedom of the will. Such a view unsettles our instincts because it forces us to confront a paradox. If God is all-powerful and wholly good, why would he allow his creation to include a force so corrupting, so destructive? The Ethiopian vision does not dodge the question, it reframes it. It suggests that the presence of evil is not a flaw in the design, but part of the architecture. Without the challenge of darkness, light would not be light, it would be an untested theory. The choice to love, to forgive, to stand for truth, gains meaning only when there is something pressing hard against it, something that tempts us to do the opposite. In this way, evil becomes, against its own will, a servant to the purposes of good. But this is no romanticizing of darkness. The Ethiopian Bible's pages are unflinching in their portrayal of the pain, destruction, and grief that evil brings. The Watcher's betrayal unleashes chaos upon the earth of violence, injustice, the exploitation of human weakness. These are not downplayed. They are presented as horrors. Yet even these horrors are not the end of the story. They become the stage upon which the drama of redemption unfolds. Divine justice rises not from the absence of evil, but from its ultimate defeat and transformation. In this telling, the cosmic story is not a clean, quick war that ends with the simple obliteration of the enemy. It is a slow, patient work of weaving all threads, light and dark, into a final tapestry where the meaning of each is revealed. And here, the victory of good is not measured merely in the destruction of evil, but in the demonstration that it was never beyond the reach of God's sovereignty. For the American reader, this vision is at once electrifying and disorienting. We have been steeped in narratives that thrive on the neat clarity of black and white moral lines. Our films, politics, and even much of our theology are built on the comfort of knowing exactly who the hero is and exactly who the villain is, with the plot requiring that one must utterly vanquish the other. The Ethiopian Bible challenges this simplicity. It whispers that perhaps the villain's role, however unwillingly played, was essential to the hero's becoming. It dares us to imagine that the battlefield of the universe is not divided between two equal powers, but governed by one will that bends even rebellion toward redemption. The shock of this idea is that it turns our moral instincts inside out. We are used to thinking of evil as something that should not exist at all, as though its presence is a sign of God's absence. But here, evil's very existence becomes part of the proof of God's design. This is not to say that God authors sin, but that he is not threatened by it. He weaves it into the larger story. It is a terrifying kind of security. The knowledge that even the darkest powers cannot step beyond the borders of his sovereignty. And so the Ethiopian Bible stands as a witness to a truth both humbling and liberating, that the forces we most fear are powerless to derail the final purpose of the Creator. They may rage, tempt, corrupt, and wound, but they cannot write the last line of the story. That line belongs to the author alone. And perhaps, when that last line is written, we will look back and see that even the shadows we hated most were necessary to show us the brilliance of the light. In the end, this vision does not excuse evil, but it strips it of the illusion of autonomy. It shows it for what it is, a force allowed for a time, bound in its scope, and destined in the end to serve a purpose it could never understand. And that purpose, the shaping of souls, the proving of love, the revelation of divine justice, is a mystery worth wrestling with until the very end. The forbidden books that rewrite the rules of morality. If the Ethiopian Bible feels strange, unsettling, or even dangerous to the assumptions of Western Christianity, it is because it contains voices, the Western canon silenced long ago voices, that speak with an authority that predates the theological boundaries later drawn by councils and empires. These are not whispers from the margins. They are the ancient heartbeats of a faith that remembers stories others have forgotten and perhaps did not want to remember. Here in bound parchment and fading ink are texts that refuse to behave like polite theology. They are raw, prophetic, unflinching, and they are not afraid to break the neat moral lines we have drawn for ourselves. The Book of Enoch is the crown jewel of these forbidden voices, a text that feels less like a religious treatise and more like a lost key to the moral architecture of the cosmos. In its pages, the world before the Great Flood is not a mere backdrop for human sin. It is a theater of cosmic rebellion, a collision between the order of heaven and the lust of corrupted divinity. The Watcher's angels charged with guiding humanity cross the boundary of their mandate. Drawn by mortal beauty, they abandon their stations, descend to earth, and in so doing, they betray not only God, but the very structure of creation. Their descent is not just a fall, it is an invasion, a rewriting of the human story with alien ink. They teach humanity the making of weapons, the brewing of poisons, the casting of spells. They show the secrets of stars and metals, but not as gifts. They are tools for domination, seduction, and violence. And yet, this is the shock: their fall is not merely villainy to be erased. It becomes, in a way that defies our modern craving for moral simplicity, the stage upon which God's justice and mercy shine brightest. Without the betrayal of the Watchers, there is no proving ground for the steadfast. Without the temptation of forbidden arts, there is no testing of the heart's allegiance. The righteous, in this telling, are not protected from the storm. They are made in it. Their steadfastness is not a fragile innocence, but a battle-forged loyalty, tempered in the heat of chaos. Then there is the Book of Jubilees, another text preserved in Ethiopia and largely lost to the West. If Enoch tells us the backstory of evil's intrusion, Jubilees reframes the entire structure of time itself. In its vision, the calendar is not a neutral human invention, but a sacred scaffold upon which the divine plan is built. Time is measured not by the rise and fall of empires, not by the reigns of kings or the conquests of armies, but by the unfolding of God's covenants. Every week, every festival, every Sabbath becomes part of a cosmic rhythm, an unending score that heaven and earth are meant to play together. To sin, then, is not merely to break a law, it is to step out of rhythm, to introduce dissonance into a symphony older than the stars. In this vision, morality is not a list of prohibitions scrawled on a dusty tablet. It is a music. Goodness is not the absence of wrong, but the active restoration of harmony to a universe whose melody has been fractured by rebellion. Evil is not just doing harm, it is discord, a false note that throws the whole into chaos. And the righteous, in this framework, are not simply rule keepers. They are musicians who, even in the midst of broken chords, insist on tuning their instruments to the original key. What is most striking about these texts, what makes them feel so alien to modern readers, is how morality is never divorced from the story of creation itself. In the West, we have been trained to separate the spiritual from the physical, to imagine morality as an abstract ideal existing in some airy philosophical realm, while the material world is merely a backdrop. But in the Ethiopian Bible, such separation is impossible. Heaven's order and earth's struggles are bound together in a single narrative. What happens in the unseen realm affects the soil beneath your feet. What happens in your heart resonates in the halls of eternity. And so morality is not, in this vision, a human invention. It is not the product of cultural consensus or evolving social contracts. It is older than humanity itself, older than angels even, woven into the very bones of the cosmos. It is not something we created. It is something we discovered. and something we can betray only at the cost of our own destruction. To live rightly is not to adhere to an arbitrary list of rules, but to align oneself with the grain of the universe, to move with the current rather than against it. Sin, in this telling, is always an act of futility as much as an act of defiance. It is rowing against the tide of reality itself. For the American reader, especially one shaped by the fragmented moral landscape of the 21st century, this is a radical recentering. We live in a culture where morality often seems negotiable, shifting with the mood of the moment, reduced to a matter of personal preference or political convenience. The Ethiopian vision cuts through this relativism like a blade. It tells us morality is not ours to redefine because it is not ours to begin with. It is as much a part of creation as gravity or light. You do not get to abolish it any more than you can abolish the sunrise. You can only live in tune with it or suffer the consequences of living against it. And this is why these forbidden books are so dangerous. They will not let us settle for a morality built only on human reasoning. They will not let us imagine that our private virtues or public laws can stand if they are not aligned with the deeper, older, cosmic law. They remind us that good and evil are not social constructs. They are realities with roots in the very origin of existence. The Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees do more than challenge our moral categories. They shatter them. They demand that we see ourselves not as isolated individuals making ethical choices in a vacuum, but as players in an ancient, ongoing drama where every act echoes in eternity. They tell us that our choices are not small. When we choose justice over exploitation, mercy over vengeance, truth over deceit, we are not merely improving our corner of the world, we are restoring harmony to a cosmic score. We are resisting the dissonance introduced by ancient rebellion. And when we choose the opposite, we are not just breaking rules. We are striking notes that work against the music of creation itself. In the end, the Ethiopian Bible's forbidden books do not so much rewrite the rules of morality as reveal the rules we have forgotten, rules that were etched into the foundation of the world long before the first human breath. They tell us that morality is not an invention of religion or philosophy, but the pulse of the universe, the steady, unyielding rhythm to which every star, every ocean, every living thing was meant to move. To live in step with it is life. To break from it is not freedom, it is collapse. And perhaps this is why the West let these voices fall silent, not because they lacked truth, but because they carried too much of it. Why the devil in the Ethiopian Bible is more than just evil. In the popular imagination, especially in the West, the devil has been reduced to a kind of cosmic caricature. He is cast as the cartoon villain of the universe, a red-skinned deceiver with horns and pitchfork, evil incarnate, irredeemable, a perfect foil to God and utterly alien to his will. In this version, Satan is a rival king waging his own war, seeking nothing less than the destruction of creation. The plot is simple. He tempts, we resist, or fall, God rescues. End of story. But the Ethiopian tradition refuses this flat, two-dimensional portrait. It does not diminish the darkness of his rebellion, nor excuse the malice that drips from every page in which he appears. Yet it frames him shockingly within a much larger tapestry. Here, Satan is not simply the destroyer, he is also the tester, the accuser, the one through whom the authenticity of human devotion is put to the flame. In the Ethiopian telling, Satan's role is both darker and more paradoxical. He is not an equal opposite to God. How could he be if God is truly sovereign? Instead, he operates under permission. His work is permitted, not because God delights in human suffering, but because trial is the crucible in which the soul is refined. The Book of Job, preserved in the Ethiopian Bible with the same forces in the West, makes this point with brutal clarity. Satan challenges Job's integrity, suggesting that his righteousness is nothing more than self-interest, that his worship is bought with blessing. God allows the challenge. The winds rise, the houses fall, the skin breaks out in sores, the world collapses, and yet, in the end, Job's faith emerges not destroyed, but purified, stripped of all pretense. The ancient monastic fathers of Ethiopia, meditating for decades in stone-hewn cells, warned that to underestimate the devil is to invite ruin. He is clever, relentless, patient beyond human measure. But they also warn that to misunderstand his place in God's story is equally dangerous. For in the Ethiopian vision, the power of evil lies partly in its role as a mirror that reflects not just the world's corruption, but our own. When we look into that mirror, we see what we are capable of if we abandon love and truth. We see our own potential for betrayal, cruelty, and pride. Without this confrontation, righteousness risks becoming theoretical, untested, fragile like a sword that has never touched stone. And so, in this light, Satan becomes against his own will an instrument, not a friend, not an ally nebrash, not a partner in the divine work, but a tool in the hand of God's sovereignty. His designs are always to destroy, to consume, to separate us from the light. But in the mystery of divine providence, those same attacks become the pressure that forces the roots of faith deeper into the soil. His temptation becomes the means by which virtue is proven real. His accusation becomes the backdrop against which mercy is shown to be greater than guilt. This is not the comfortable morality of Sunday school flannel boards, where the devil is easily outwitted by a few well-placed Bible verses and where the stakes feel safely abstract. It is a sobering truth that the forces we most fear may be the very forces that shape our souls into something unbreakable. The Ethiopian Bible dares to confront us with the reality that our encounter with evil is not an accident, it is inevitable, and it will not be a one-time event. It will be the arena in which we live our entire lives. In this way, the Ethiopian vision undermines the neat Western tendency to treat Satan as either omnipotent or irrelevant. He is neither. He is dangerous but bound. He is cunning but not sovereign. He works within limits set by the very God he despises. And here is the paradox that unsettles the soul. Those limits are drawn not merely for our protection, but for our transformation. Evil is allowed just enough room to force the question, will you choose the light when darkness is close enough to touch? The devil in this telling is not a rival God locked in endless stalemate with the Creator. He is a rebel commander whose every move is unknowingly already accounted for in the divine strategy. His rage and cunning, while real, serve to sharpen the resolve of the saints, to sift the half-hearted from the faithful. This does not make him harmless. It makes him part of the terrifying grandeur of a creation in which freedom is real and the stakes are eternal. American readers steeped in a culture of instant solutions and clean resolutions may find this vision difficult. We prefer stories in which evil is quickly vanquished and banished to the shadows, where temptation is something we awe and overcome once before moving on to safer ground. But the Ethiopian understanding forces us to abandon that illusion. It tells us that temptation is not a chapter we pass through, it is the constant condition of a free will in a broken world. And that the devil's role, while hateful, is to ensure that the choice for good remains a choice at all. What emerges is a morality that is not sentimental but fierce. Virtue is not the absence of trial, it is the refusal to yield within it. Righteousness is not a fragile glass sculpture, it is a tempered blade, hammered again and again against the anvil of adversity. And in this forging process, the devil is the unintentional blacksmith, pounding away with the heat of his malice, not realizing that every blow only strengthens the weapon he seeks to destroy. The Ethiopian Bible does not invite us to admire Satan. It does not blur the line between his rebellion and the will of God. His choice to defy the Creator is evil pure and unredeemed. Yet the mystery is that his existence, his activity, even his malice, cannot escape being woven into a larger design that will one day expose his defeat as inevitable from the very beginning. In the final reckoning, his power will be shown to have been not a rival to God's, but a shadow that only made the light more visible. And so the challenge to us is not merely to resist the devil as an isolated command, but to understand the stakes of that resistance. Every temptation resisted is not just a personal victory, it is a public declaration that the accuser's claim was false, that our devotion is not bought, that love can survive without reward. Every time we turn from the lure of self-interest, vengeance, or deceit, we are participating in the quiet undoing of his work. This is the sober brilliance of the Ethiopian vision. It takes the devil seriously, but it takes God's sovereignty even more seriously. It does not comfort us with the idea that life will be safe. It warns us that it will be dangerous, and then insists that this danger is the very environment in which souls are made eternal. The devil is not the final word on our story. He is the catalyst that reveals whether the word has truly taken root in us. The encounter with evil, then, is not simply a test to be passed. It is the furnace in which we are forged. And the Ethiopian Bible leaves us with a truth that burns hotter than fear. The one we dread, the one who seeks to undo us, is ultimately powerless to write the ending. That ending belongs to the one who, from the very beginning, set the boundaries within which even rebellion must play its part. The final balance, how the end of time unites heaven and hell. Perhaps the most startling divergence between the Ethiopian vision and the familiar contours of Western eschatology lies in its portrayal of the end. In the West, we are accustomed to imagining the finale of history as a decisive, absolute purge, evil obliterated, Satan cast into the lake of fire, the wicked erased from the book of life, the cosmos cleansed forever of shadow. The narrative is one of annihilation, light finally snuffing out darkness as though stamping out the last ember of a long night. But the Ethiopian tradition, while affirming judgment and justice, carries within it a quieter, stranger, and more mysterious note, one that does not end with mere destruction, but with something infinitely more daring: restoration. The apocalyptic visions preserved in its canon tell of a final triumph of God that is not limited to the crushing of rebellion, but to its transformation. Darkness, having played its terrible role in the long history of creation, is not simply cast aside into eternal oblivion. It is stripped of its venom, disarmed of its rage, and drawn under the reign of divine harmony. Hell in this vision is not a rival kingdom holding its ground forever in opposition to heaven. It is conquered territory, reclaimed and remade. The end of time is not just victory, it is wholeness. It is the healing of a universe once torn in two, the mending of a fabric ripped from the beginning, the reunion of estranged realms under the rightful king. This vision does not minimize the reality of sin. It does not excuse the centuries of suffering, the rivers of blood, the betrayals and cruelties that scar the human story. It does not deny the reality of judgment, nor soften the edge of divine justice. It is not sentimental. The scales will still be weighed, every wrong will still be accounted for, every wound still reckoned with. But it dares to suggest that the ultimate glory of God, it is not measured by his ability to win a war against an equal adversary, because there never was such equality. The devil was never God's opposite. Rebellion was never outside the range of his sovereignty. And in the end, the final display of divine power will not be in the eradication of the rebel, but in the demonstration that even rebellion has been bent into the arc of redemption. For the modern Western reader, this is a staggering thought. We have grown comfortable with a moral landscape painted in hard, contrasting lines, light and dark, good and evil, heaven and hell, forever separated. The Ethiopian vision dismantles this dualism and replaces it with something at once more humbling and more unsettling, a cosmos in which nothing, not the deepest fall, nor the darkest night, lies beyond the reach of redemption. Even the forces we have been taught to fear without measure, even the realms we have imagined as irreversibly lost, are here brought under the final sway of a God who leaves nothing outside the scope of his making new. This is the vision that strips away the false comfort of a tidy ending where the story concludes in segregation. The good in one place, the bad in another, the gulf fixed forever. The Ethiopian Bible dares to offer something more dangerous, a finale where the gulf itself is healed, where what was at war is brought into peace, not by compromise, but by the overwhelming force of transformation. The war does not end because the enemies agree to stop fighting. It ends because there is no enemy left to fight. And this is perhaps the hardest truth for the modern believer to accept, that God's victory may not look like the triumph of one side over another, but the reordering of all things in a harmony. We prefer the security of knowing that evil will be erased entirely, that it will simply cease to exist. The Ethiopian witness insists instead that the last word will not be erasure but reclamation, that even the scorched lands of hell can become fertile ground when touched by the will of the Creator. That justice is not fully done until what was broken is not only punished, but made whole. It is not an easy vision. It forces us to look at the shadows we despise and ask whether they, too, are destined to be caught up in the light. It forces us to admit that our desire for revenge, however dressed in the language of justice, is smaller than God's desire for restoration. It tells us that the author of history does not simply write evil out of the script. He rewrites it until it serves his ending. And here is where the Ethiopian Bible ceases to be merely an ancient curiosity and becomes a direct challenge. It invites us to believe that the story of good and evil was never the story of two equal forces locked in eternal battle, but the story of a single sovereign will, shaping even the most violent rebellions into instruments of redemption. It invites us to see the shadows not as proof of God's absence, but as the very canvas upon which his light paints its most astonishing colors. For Americans shaped by a culture of moral simplicity, where the hero defeats the villain and the curtain falls, this vision can feel almost unbearable. It dismantles the narrative we have built to comfort ourselves. That evil can be dealt with neatly, swiftly, and in ways that confirm our instincts for separation. The Ethiopian witness tells us instead that God's victory is not small enough to fit into our need for clean divides. His victory is the kind that heals what we would have thrown away. It is the kind that empties hell, not by denying justice, but by completing it in ways that justice alone could never achieve. And if this is true, if even evil has its place in the divine plan, then the most dangerous question of all comes to rest at our feet. What then is the measure of our own part in the story? If the final act of history is not merely about which side we were on, but about whether we ourselves participated in the work of restoration, then the stakes shift. We are no longer passive spectators waiting for God to end the war. We are active characters whose every choice either hastens or hinders the mending of the torn fabric of creation. The Ethiopian Bible offers no comfort to those who wish to sit out the battle, content to wait for God to remove the darkness while they stand idle in the light. It calls us instead into the dangerous, humbling, and redemptive work of bringing every shadow into the reach of the light, even the shadows within ourselves. For if the end is indeed restoration, then our own transformation is part of that cosmic reconciliation. And the greatest tragedy would not be to have fought on the wrong side, but to have refused to take part at all.